Captain Heinrich Müller pressed his eye against the periscope, watching the horizon through the choppy waters of the North Atlantic. What he saw made his blood run cold. Ships, hundreds of them, stretching across the ocean like a steel armada that defied everything German naval intelligence had told him. The convoy that was supposed to have maybe 30 merchant vessels suddenly looked like the entire Allied fleet had gathered in one place. Müller's hands trembled as he adjusted the scope's focus. 1,000, 2,000. He stopped counting at 5,000 ships, knowing that somewhere out there, hidden beyond his limited view, were tens of thousands more. This wasn't just a convoy, this was an invasion force that would change the course of the war forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. March 15, 1943. The German submarine U-247 cut through the frigid waters 60 miles southwest of Iceland, its diesel engines humming quietly beneath the surface. Captain Heinrich Müller had been hunting Allied shipping lanes for 3 weeks without encountering a single target worth the torpedoes in his tubes. Intelligence reports from Berlin painted a picture of scattered merchant convoys, lightly defended and ripe for the taking. Müller's crew of 42 men had grown restless, eager for action after weeks of empty ocean. Petty Officer Klaus Weber hunched over the sonar equipment, his trained ear detecting the faintest vibrations through the water. For hours he'd been picking up distant engine noise, but nothing concrete enough to warrant surfacing for a visual confirmation. The sounds seemed too numerous, too coordinated to be the typical merchant convoy they'd been tracking. "Captain," Weber called out, removing his headphones with a puzzled expression. "I'm reading multiple contacts, more than I can count accurately." Müller moved through the cramped control room, past banks of gauges and switches that monitored every aspect of their underwater existence. The air was thick with the smell of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and the metallic tang of recycled oxygen. His crew watched him with the intense focus of men who'd learned to read their captain's every expression for signs of danger or opportunity. "How many contacts?" Müller asked, studying the sonar readings over Weber's shoulder. "At least 50, sir, but the signatures are overlapping so heavily that I suspect there are many more. The sound profile suggests a mix of merchant vessels, destroyers, and what might be cruisers or battleships." Lieutenant Franz Hoffmann, Müller's executive officer, approached with the latest intelligence briefings clutched in his hand. A thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, Hoffmann had served on submarines since 1940 and possessed an analytical mind that Müller had come to rely on during their months together beneath the waves. "Sir, according to Berlin's latest reports, we should expect convoy formations of no more than 40 vessels. What Weber's describing sounds like something entirely different." Müller considered their options. U-247 carried 14 torpedoes, enough to sink several merchant ships if they could position themselves correctly. But engaging a force of unknown size without proper reconnaissance would be suicide. The submarine's crew had families waiting back in Bremen, Hamburg, and Berlin. Every decision Müller made carried the weight of their lives and the broader strategic objectives of the Kriegsmarine. "Take us to periscope depth," he ordered. "We need eyes on whatever's out there." The submarine rose slowly through the dark water, its hull creaking under the changing pressure. Müller positioned himself at the periscope, waiting for the lens to break the surface. What he saw through that narrow circle of glass would haunt him for the rest of his life. Ships stretched across the horizon in every direction. Not the neat columns of a standard convoy, but a vast maritime formation that seemed to cover the entire visible ocean. Merchant vessels of every size and description sailed alongside military escorts that included destroyers, cruisers, and what appeared to be aircraft carriers positioned at strategic intervals throughout the fleet. "Mein Gott," Mueller whispered, his hands gripping the periscope handles so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Through the lens, he could see Liberty ships, Victory ships, tankers, and cargo vessels flying the flags of Britain, America, Canada, and Norway. The escort vessels moved in precise patterns around the merchant ships, their gun turrets trained outward in anticipation of submarine attacks. But it was the sheer scale of the formation that defied comprehension. Mueller began counting ships in sections, trying to estimate the total size of what he was observing. The front rank alone contained over 200 vessels. Behind them, more ranks stretched toward the horizon, each containing hundreds more. Conservative estimates suggested at least 10,000 vessels, but Mueller suspected the actual number was far higher. "Captain," Hoffman called from below, "what do you see?" Mueller remained silent for several minutes, rotating the periscope to survey the entire formation. To the north, south, east, and west, the ocean was filled with Allied shipping. This wasn't a convoy in any traditional sense. This was the largest maritime force ever assembled, carrying what must be millions of tons of supplies, equipment, and personnel. "Weber," Mueller called down to the sonar operator, "can you get a more accurate count on those contacts?" "I've been trying, sir, but the signatures are so dense that individual contacts merge together. My best estimate is several thousand vessels, but that might be conservative." The implications began to settle in Mueller's mind like cold water filling the submarine's ballast tanks. If the Allies had assembled a force of this magnitude, it could only mean one thing: a massive offensive operation is underway. The supplies and equipment carried by these ships could sustain entire army groups for months of intensive combat. Mueller thought of the intelligence briefings he'd received before departing Brest 3 weeks earlier. German Naval Command had been tracking increased Allied shipping activity, but nothing in their reports had suggested an operation of this scale. Either Allied security had been perfect, or German intelligence had suffered a catastrophic failure. Through the periscope, Mueller watched a group of destroyers executing a coordinated turn, their wake patterns creating geometric designs on the ocean's surface. The level of coordination and discipline displayed by the escort vessels suggested months of planning and preparation. This wasn't a hastily assembled convoy, but a carefully orchestrated military operation. "Sir," Lieutenant Hoffman said quietly, "if we're going to attack, we need to position ourselves soon. A formation this large will have extensive sonar coverage." Mueller considered his options. 14 torpedoes against thousands of ships seemed absurdly inadequate. Even if every torpedo found its target, the damage to such a massive force would be negligible. But allowing this convoy to reach its destination unopposed would be equally unacceptable. The captain rotated the periscope one final time, trying to find the edges of the Allied formation. To the west, where the convoy appeared to be heading, more ships continued to appear on the horizon. The full scope of what he was witnessing began to crystallize in his mind. This wasn't just the largest convoy ever assembled. This was potentially 50,000 Allied vessels carrying the resources to fundamentally alter the balance of power in Europe. Mueller stepped back from the periscope, his face pale in the red light of the control room. His crew watched him expectantly, waiting for orders that would determine not just their fate, but potentially the outcome of the entire war. The decision he made in the next few minutes would echo through history, though none of them could know it yet. The ocean above them continued to fill with the sound of thousands of ship engines, a mechanical symphony that spoke of industrial might and strategic planning on an unprecedented scale. And somewhere in that vast armada, Allied commanders were probably unaware that a lone German submarine had discovered their secret. The silence in U-247's control room stretched for what felt like hours, though only seconds had passed since Captain Muller stepped away from the periscope. Every man aboard understood that something extraordinary was happening above them, but none could grasp the full magnitude of what their captain had witnessed. "Emergency dive," Muller ordered suddenly. "Take us down to 100 meters." The crew sprang into action, their movements precise despite the tension crackling through the submarine's cramped compartments. Chief Petty Officer Robert Anderson, a veteran submariner from Michigan who joined the Kriegsmarine through a twisted path of circumstances, supervised the dive with mechanical efficiency. Water flooded into the ballast tanks as U-247 slipped deeper into the Atlantic's cold embrace. Muller gathered his senior officers in the tiny wardroom adjacent to the control room. Lieutenant Hoffman spread their operational charts across the small table, while Weber brought his sonar logs and Chief Engineer Dale Patterson wiping grease from his hands with a stained rag. "Gentlemen," Muller began, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind, "what I observed through that periscope changes everything we thought we knew about Allied naval capabilities." He pointed to their position on the chart, then drew a rough circle encompassing nearly 50 square miles of ocean. "This entire area is filled with Allied vessels, not hundreds, not thousands, but what appears to be tens of thousands of ships moving in coordinated formation." Patterson, a practical man who'd spent 20 years maintaining submarine engines, frowned at the impossibility of what he was hearing. "Sir, with respect, no nation on Earth has that many ships. The entire German merchant marine before the war was less than 5,000 vessels." "I counted carefully," Muller replied. "Conservative estimates suggest at least 20,000 ships, but I believe the actual number approaches 50,000 vessels." The officers exchanged glances of disbelief. Hoffman adjusted his glasses and studied the operational intelligence they'd received from Berlin just days before leaving port. "Our briefings indicated maximum convoy sizes of 40 to 60 ships. This scale suggests either a complete intelligence failure or the Allies have been planning something far beyond our comprehension," Muller finished. Weber consulted his sonar readings, cross-referencing the acoustic signatures he'd been tracking for hours. "The engine noise patterns support the captain's assessment. I'm detecting everything from small coastal vessels to what sound like battleships. The formation extends beyond my equipment's maximum range." Muller walked to the small porthole, though at their current depth only darkness was visible through the thick glass. Above them, thousands of Allied vessels continued their eastward journey, carrying cargo that could reshape the European theater. The weight of command had never felt heavier. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Sir," Hoffman said quietly, "we need to consider our options. Do we attack, or do we break radio silence and report to Berlin?" The question struck at the heart of Müller's dilemma. U-247 carried enough torpedoes to sink a handful of ships, but attacking such a massive force would be like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The submarine would be hunted down and destroyed within hours of revealing its position. Yet allowing this armada to proceed unopposed seemed equally unthinkable. Chief Patterson spoke up from his position near the engine room bulkhead. "Captain, if we're going to transmit to headquarters, we need to do it soon. Our fuel situation limits how long we can shadow this formation." Müller nodded, though his mind was racing through tactical possibilities. A direct attack was suicide, but there might be other options. The convoy's massive size suggested it couldn't maintain high speeds or execute rapid course changes. If U-247 could identify key vessels within the formation, targeted strikes might disrupt the entire operation. Weber, what's the acoustic signature of the largest vessels you're tracking? The sonar operator consulted his notes, cross-referencing engine sounds with known ship classifications. Several contacts match the profile of aircraft carriers, sir. There are also multiple signatures consistent with heavy cruisers and what might be converted passenger liners. Aircraft carriers would be protected by destroyer screens and would change the tactical situation dramatically if U-247 was detected. But converted passenger liners might carry thousands of troops, making them high-value targets despite their civilian origins. Mueller made his decision, with the cold calculation that submarine warfare demanded. We'll shadow the formation for 6 hours, gathering intelligence on composition, speed, and heading. Then we'll surface after dark and transmit everything to Berlin. "What about attacking, sir?" Lieutenant Hoffman asked. 14 torpedoes against 50,000 ships would be meaningless. But if Berlin can coordinate wolfpack attacks or redirect surface units, we might accomplish something significant. The officers dispersed to their duties, leaving Mueller alone with his thoughts. Through the submarine's hull, the distant rumble of massive engines provided a constant reminder of the Allied force passing overhead. He thought of his wife Maria in Bremen, waiting for his return from what was supposed to be a routine patrol. She had no way of knowing that her husband had stumbled upon what might be the largest military operation in human history. Hours passed as U-247 maintained its shadowing course, staying deep enough to avoid detection while Weber tracked the convoy's movements. The formation maintained a steady 8 knots, suggesting heavily loaded cargo vessels that couldn't sustain higher speeds. Destroyer escorts swept the flanks in predictable patterns, their sonar pings occasionally echoing through the submarine's hull. As evening approached, Mueller returned to the periscope for another observation. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ocean's surface, but the Allied formation remained clearly visible. If anything, the convoy appeared even larger than his initial estimates. Ships stretched from horizon to horizon in all directions, their navigation lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Captain, I'm detecting course changes throughout the formation. They appear to be executing a coordinated turn to the northeast." The new heading worried Mueller. Northeast from their current position would take the convoy toward the Norwegian coast, potentially threatening German naval bases or supporting landings in Scandinavia. The strategic implications were staggering. "Prepare to surface," Mueller ordered. "We will transmit to Berlin immediately." U-247 rose through the dark water as stars began appearing in the clear night sky. The submarine's radio antenna broke the surface first, followed by the conning tower, where Mueller and his radio operator prepared to send what might be the most important message of the war. Mueller personally composed the transmission, choosing his words carefully to convey the unprecedented nature of what they discovered. As the radio operator began transmitting, electromagnetic waves carried their report across hundreds of miles of ocean toward German naval headquarters, where duty officers would soon face the impossible task of believing what U-247 had witnessed. Admiral Karl Brennan paced the operations room of German Naval Command in Berlin, his polished boots clicking against the marble floor, as he reviewed the night's intelligence reports. The clock on the wall showed 2:47 a.m., but sleep had become a luxury that senior officers could rarely afford in 1943. Maps covered every wall, marked with colored pins representing U-boat positions, Allied shipping lanes, and suspected enemy naval movements across the Atlantic. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Martinez burst through the heavy oak doors, clutching a decoded message that had arrived minutes earlier from the communications center. His face was pale, and his usually immaculate uniform showed signs of having been hastily assembled. "Admiral, we have an urgent transmission from U-247. Captain Mueller reports contact with what he describes as an Allied convoy of unprecedented size." Brennan stopped pacing and fixed Martinez with a stern gaze. "Define unprecedented, Commander." Martinez consulted the message, his voice wavering slightly as he read. "Sir, Captain Mueller estimates 50,000 vessels in coordinated formation proceeding northeast toward Norwegian waters." The silence that followed was broken only by the distant sound of Berlin's air raid sirens, a nightly reminder of the war's proximity to the Reich's capital. Brennan snatched the message from Martinez's hands, reading Mueller's carefully worded report with growing incredulity. "This is impossible," Brennan muttered, studying the coordinates and tactical assessments. "Our entire intelligence network would have detected preparations for an operation of this magnitude." Captain William Thompson, the naval intelligence chief, emerged from behind a bank of filing cabinets, where he'd been cross-referencing shipping reports. A methodical man who'd spent decades analyzing enemy capabilities, Thompson possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Allied naval assets. "Admiral, with respect, our estimates suggest the combined merchant marines of Britain, America, and Canada total approximately 12,000 vessels of all sizes. Captain Mueller's report exceeds these numbers by a factor of 4. Brennan walked to the central plotting table, where a detailed map of the North Atlantic displayed current U-boat positions and known Allied shipping routes. U-247's reported location placed them directly astride the primary convoy route between North America and Britain, making their observation credible from a positioning standpoint. Could Mueller have miscounted? Brennan asked, though his tone suggested he already doubted this explanation. Thompson shook his head. Heinrich Mueller commanded destroyers before transferring to submarines. His experience with fleet formations makes gross miscounting unlikely. If he reports 50,000 vessels, he saw something extraordinary. The implications began crystallizing in his mind like frost forming on a winter window. An Allied force of such magnitude could only serve one purpose: a massive amphibious operation that would fundamentally alter the war's trajectory. The resources required to assemble 50,000 ships would have demanded months of preparation and coordination between multiple Allied nations. Martinez, has Mueller reported the convoy's composition, military escorts, transport types, anything that might indicate their objective? Martinez consulted additional pages of the decoded transmission. He identifies aircraft carriers, heavy cruisers, destroyers, and what appear to be converted passenger liners among the military vessels. The merchant ships include Liberty ships, tankers, and cargo vessels of various sizes and nationalities. Brennan studied the map intently, tracing possible routes from U-247's position toward potential Allied objectives. The convoy's northeastern heading suggested several possible targets: Norway, Denmark, or even a direct assault on northern Germany itself. Thompson, what Allied operations could justify assembling this many vessels? The intelligence chief consulted his files, cross-referencing known Allied capabilities with potential strategic objectives. "Sir, an invasion of Western Europe would require massive logistical support, but traditional estimates suggested maximum forces of 10 to 15,000 ships. This scale suggests either multiple simultaneous operations or something beyond our current understanding of Allied intentions." The radio in the corner of the operations room crackled to life as another transmission arrived from the Atlantic. Lieutenant James Parker, the duty communications officer, decoded the message rapidly before approaching Brennan with obvious urgency. "Admiral, U-412 reports unusual sonar contacts approximately 200 miles south of U-247's position. Captain Richter describes multiple large formations but cannot provide accurate counts due to acoustic interference." Brennan felt his stomach drop as the strategic picture became clearer. Multiple U-boats encountering massive Allied formations suggested a coordinated operation of unprecedented scale. The intelligence failure that had allowed such preparations to proceed undetected represented a catastrophic breakdown in German naval awareness. "Sir," Thompson said quietly, "if these reports are accurate, we're facing the largest naval operation in history. The implications for our Atlantic defense strategy are staggering." Brennan moved to the secure telephone that connected naval headquarters directly to the highest levels of German command. The conversation he was about to initiate would disturb powerful people from their sleep, but the information couldn't wait for morning staff meetings and routine briefings. Before placing the call, he turned to Martinez and Thompson. "Gentlemen, everything discussed in this room tonight is classified at the highest level. If word of these reports leaks prematurely, it could trigger panic throughout our naval forces." As Brennan lifted the telephone handset, his mind raced through contingency plans and emergency protocols. Every U-boat in the Atlantic would need immediate redeployment to gather intelligence on this massive Allied force. Surface units would require new orders, and coastal defenses from Norway to France might need reinforcement. The first ring of the telephone seemed to echo through the operations room like a gunshot. Somewhere in a fortified bunker beneath Berlin, duty officers would soon be awakening senior commanders with news that challenged everything they thought they knew about Allied capabilities. Thompson spread additional charts across the plotting table, marking potential interception points where German forces might engage elements of the massive convoy. But even as he worked, the mathematics of the situation were undeniable. Germany's entire remaining surface fleet couldn't hope to seriously damage a force of 50,000 vessels. "Martinez," Brennan said, covering the telephone's mouthpiece, "draft orders for all Atlantic U-boats. They are to immediately proceed to grid squares adjacent to U-247's position and provide independent confirmation of convoy size and composition." As the telephone continued ringing, Brennan realized that the next few hours would determine whether Germany could mount any effective response to what appeared to be the Allies' decisive stroke. The war that had raged for nearly 4 years was about to enter a new phase, and Germany found itself strategically blind to an enemy force of unprecedented magnitude. In the North Atlantic, U-247 continued shadowing the massive convoy, unaware that their discovery would soon trigger the largest naval redeployment in German military history. Captain Mueller's careful observations had set in motion events that would reverberate through the highest levels of command, challenging assumptions and forcing desperate tactical adaptations. The telephone finally connected, and Brennan began the conversation that would transform a single submarine's report into a crisis that would test every aspect of Germany's remaining naval capabilities. Captain Douglas Mitchell pressed his face against the rain-streaked glass of U-531's conning tower, scanning the choppy waters of the North Atlantic through his binoculars. The storm that had battered his submarine for the past 18 hours was finally beginning to subside, revealing patches of gray sky between the towering clouds. His orders had been explicit: proceed to grid reference Wolf 7 and await further instructions. 300 miles southeast of U-247's position, Mitchell commanded one of 12 U-boats racing toward what German Naval Command was calling Operation Neptune Jaeger. The emergency deployment had caught every submarine captain by surprise, pulling them away from their assigned patrol areas and hunting grounds to converge on coordinates that promised either the greatest victory or most catastrophic defeat in U-boat warfare history. "Captain," called Lieutenant Samuel Jackson from the radio compartment, "incoming transmission from BDU headquarters."
Mitchell climbed down into the submarine's cramped interior, where the smell of diesel fuel and wet clothing created an atmosphere thick enough to cut with a knife. His crew of 38 men had been pushing U-531 to its mechanical limits for 2 days, and the strain was beginning to show on both man and machine. The decoded message contained detailed intelligence gathered from multiple U-boat observations over the past 48 hours. What had begun as U-247's impossible report was now confirmed by 6 separate submarines, a massive Allied convoy of unprecedented scale. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Davis, U-531's most experienced sonar operator, looked up from his equipment with the expression of a man who'd seen too much war to be easily surprised. "Captain, I'm picking up engine noise from multiple submarines converging opposition. Sounds like the entire wolf pack is assembling." Mitchell studied the tactical situation developing around them. 12 U-boats represented the largest concentration of German submarines since the early days of the war, when such formations could devastate Allied shipping with coordinated attacks. But the enemy force they were preparing to engage dwarfed anything previously encountered. The first submarine to break the surface nearby was U-892, commanded by Captain Richard Hayes, a veteran of the Mediterranean campaigns whose reputation for aggressive tactics was legendary among U-boat crews. Through his periscope, Mitchell watched Hayes's submarine rise from the depths like a steel whale, water cascading from its sleek hull. Within hours, the ocean around Mitchell's position had become a gathering point for Germany's most experienced submarine commanders. Each U-boat carried between 12 and 16 torpedoes, providing the Wolfpack with enough firepower to sink nearly 200 ships. Against a convoy of 50,000 vessels, however, such numbers seemed pathetically inadequate. Captain Jonathan Pierce of U-647 was the first to break radio silence after all 12 submarines had assembled. His voice crackled through the short-range radio system that connected the Wolfpack, carrying the authority of a man who'd sunk more Allied tonnage than any other U-boat commander still alive. The magnitude of those numbers set over the assembled submarine commanders like a cold fog. 60,000 ships represented more vessels than had participated in every major naval battle of the war combined. The logistical complexity of coordinating such a force boggled the imagination. Mitchell consulted his charts, calculating fuel consumption and torpedo loads against the tactical realities they faced. Even if the Wolfpack achieved perfect coordination and every attack succeeded, they would barely scratch the surface of such a massive enemy formation. "Pierce, this is Mitchell on U-531. What are our engagement orders? Standard Wolfpack tactics won't be effective against a force this size."
Pierce's response revealed the desperation driving German naval strategy. Orders are to identify and target the most critical vessels within the convoy. Aircraft carriers, command ships, and heavy transports carrying military equipment take priority. We hit them hard, then withdraw before the escort forces can coordinate a response. Lieutenant Commander Brian Anderson of U-299 interrupted with a tactical concern that had been troubling every captain in the Wolfpack. The escort screen for a convoy this size will be massive. Destroyer coverage could extend for hundreds of square miles around the merchant vessels. Anderson was right, and every submarine commander knew it. Traditional convoy escorts included 1 destroyer for every 10 to 15 merchant ships. A convoy of 60,000 vessels would require thousands of escort ships, creating a defensive network that would be nearly impossible to penetrate. "That's exactly why we're here," Pierce replied. "Naval Command believes this convoy represents the Allies' final strategic gamble. If we can disrupt it significantly, we might buy Germany months of breathing room to reorganize our defenses." Mitchell understood the unspoken implications. This wasn't just another patrol or routine convoy attack. The Wolfpack was being sent on what amounted to a suicide mission, with the slim hope that their sacrifice might delay whatever massive operation the Allies were planning. Chief Davis emerged from the sonar compartment with acoustic analysis of the approaching convoy. "Captain, the engine signatures are unlike anything I've encountered. The formation appears to include vessels of every conceivable type, from small coastal freighters to what sound like converted ocean liners." The diversity of ship types suggested a comprehensive military operation requiring vast amounts of supplies, equipment, and personnel. Mitchell tried to imagine the ports and shipyards that must have worked around the clock to assemble such a force. The coordination between allied nations that would have been necessary to achieve such scale. As darkness fell across the North Atlantic, the 12 U-boats of Operation Neptunejäger began their approach toward the massive Allied convoy. Each submarine carried the hopes and desperation of a nation that was slowly losing the war, their torpedoes representing Germany's last meaningful chance to strike back against an enemy whose industrial might had finally reached full mobilization. Mitchell ordered U-531 to dive, beginning the underwater approach that would bring them within striking range of history's largest naval formation. Around him, his crew prepared their weapons and equipment with the grim efficiency of professional submariners who understood they might not survive the next 24 hours. The Wolfpack had assembled, but they were about to discover that even a perfectly coordinated pack of wolves could do little against an ocean filled with prey that vastly outnumbered them. The mathematics of naval warfare were about to assert themselves with brutal clarity, teaching German submarine commanders that courage and skill could only accomplish so much against overwhelming enemy superiority. Above them, 60,000 Allied ships continued their steady progress toward an objective that would reshape the European theater, while below, 12 German submarines prepared to write the final chapter of the U-boat war in the North Atlantic. Dawn broke across the North Atlantic with deceptive tranquility, painting the ocean's surface in shades of gold and crimson that belied the carnage about to unfold beneath the waves. Captain Heinrich Müller guided U-247 through the outer edges of the massive Allied formation, his periscope cutting through the morning swells as he transmitted final targeting coordinates to the assembled Wolfpack. The convoy had grown even larger during the night. Müller's latest count suggested 70,000 vessels spread across nearly 200 square miles of ocean, their combined tonnage representing the greatest concentration of maritime resources in human history. Steam rose from countless smokestacks, creating an artificial weather system above the formation as thousands of engines propelled this floating city toward its mysterious destination. All Wolfpack units, this is Müller. Begin final approach. Target priority remains aircraft carriers and command vessels. Execute Tactic 7 on my signal. Tactic 7 was a desperate innovation developed specifically for this operation. Instead of the traditional coordinated attack, each U-boat would select independent targets and fire simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm the escort vessel's ability to respond effectively. Captain Douglas Mitchell maneuvered U-531 toward what appeared to be a converted passenger liner flying British flags. Through his periscope, he could see soldiers in khaki uniforms lining the ship's decks, thousands of men who would soon participate in whatever operation this massive convoy was designed to support. The vessel's size suggested it could carry an entire division of troops, making it a legitimate military target despite its civilian origins. Flood tubes 1 through 4,
Mitchell ordered, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what they were attempting. Around him, throughout the convoy, 11 other U-boat commanders were making similar preparations, their submarines positioned at carefully calculated intervals to maximize the psychological impact of simultaneous attacks. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Davis tracked the movements of nearby destroyers, their sonar pings growing more frequent as the escort vessels sensed something amiss in the waters around their charges. Captain Jonathan Pierce in U-647 had positioned his submarine beneath a formation of aircraft carriers. The massive ships rode high in the water, their flight decks crowded with fighter aircraft that would soon provide air cover for the Allied operation. Pierce understood that sinking even one carrier would represent a significant tactical victory, but the mathematical reality remained unchanged: 12 submarines against 70,000 ships. "Sonar contact bearing 270, reported Lieutenant Samuel Jackson from U-531's detection station. "Destroyers approaching at high speed, range decreasing rapidly." Mitchell cursed silently as he realized their attack window was closing faster than anticipated. The Allied escort commanders had developed sophisticated techniques for detecting submarine threats, and the Wolfpack's concentration was apparently triggering their defensive protocols. "All boats, this is Pierce. Execute immediately. Fire when ready." The order unleashed the largest coordinated U-boat attack of the war. Across the vast convoy formation, torpedoes streaked through the dark water toward their targets, their wake trails invisible beneath the surface but deadly in their precision. Mitchell watched through his periscope as U-531's first torpedo struck the passenger liner amidships, the explosion sending a column of water and debris hundreds of feet into the air. Similar explosions erupted throughout the convoy as the Wolfpack's weapons found their marks. An aircraft carrier listed heavily to starboard as Captain Pierce's torpedoes ruptured its hull below the waterline. Merchant vessels carrying tanks and artillery pieces disappeared beneath the waves within minutes of being struck. For a brief moment, it seemed as though 12 determined submarines might actually damage this massive Allied force. The response came with overwhelming fury. Destroyers throughout the convoy formation turned toward the torpedo tracks, their depth-charge launchers already loaded with explosive canisters designed to crush submarine hulls. The ocean around the Wolfpack erupted in gyres of white water as hundreds of depth charges detonated simultaneously. U-299 was the first casualty. Lieutenant Commander Brian Anderson's submarine took a direct hit from a depth charge that crushed its pressure hull like an aluminum can. 42 men died instantly as the Atlantic rushed into their shattered vessel, sending U-299 to the ocean floor 3 miles below. Captain Richard Hayes attempted to escape the destroyer screen in U-892, but his submarine's damaged diving planes prevented rapid descent. 3 British destroyers converged on his position, their combined depth-charge attacks creating an underwater earthquake that left U-892 dead in the water. Hayes ordered his crew to abandon ship as the submarine began its final dive. Mitchell pushed U-531 to its maximum depth, hoping to escape beneath the thermal layer that might confuse enemy sonar. Around him, his crew worked frantically to repair damage from near-miss explosions that had buckled bulkheads and shattered gauges throughout the submarine. The sound of destroyer engines filled the water above them, growing louder as more escort vessels joined the hunt.
"Captain," reported Chief Davis, his voice strained with exhaustion and fear, "I count at least 20 destroyers in our immediate vicinity. They're conducting a systematic search pattern." Through the chaos of the counterattack, Captain Mueller in U-247 attempted to coordinate the Wolfpack's withdrawal, but radio communications were sporadic, and several submarines had already been lost or damaged beyond repair. The precision attack that had taken months to plan was disintegrating into a desperate fight for survival. The mathematical reality that had doomed the operation from its inception now asserted itself with brutal clarity. Even if every torpedo had found its target, the Wolf Pack had managed to sink fewer than 20 vessels from a convoy of 70,000 ships. The Allied formation continued its steady progress toward Norway, barely slowed by attacks that represented Germany's maximum submarine effort. Captain Pierce surfaced U-647 after dark, hoping to escape under cover of darkness. His submarine had taken severe damage from depth charge attacks, and several crew members required immediate medical attention. As he scanned the horizon through his binoculars, Pierce could see the lights of the massive convoy continuing eastward, its escorts still hunting for surviving U-boats. Of the 12 submarines that had assembled for Operation Neptune Jager, only 5 would survive to reach friendly ports. The others lay scattered across the Atlantic floor, their crews joining the thousands of German submariners who had already paid the ultimate price in the Battle of the Atlantic. Captain Mueller guided U-247 towards the Norwegian coast, his fuel tanks nearly empty and his torpedo tubes bare. Behind him, the largest naval force in history continued its inexorable advance, carrying the resources that would enable the Allies to open a second front in Western Europe. The age of the U-boat was ending, not with glory or strategic victory, but with the simple mathematics of industrial warfare. The convoy that no German captain had expected would reach its destination unopposed, forever changing the course of the war and marking the final chapter of Germany's submarine campaign in the North Atlantic. 70,000 Allied ships had proven that even the ocean's apex predators were powerless against overwhelming numbers and superior industrial capacity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.